to everyone. But I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to attend. I see a lot of familiar names here that have joined us, and I appreciate y'all attending. We found that these seminars are great opportunities for everyone to just get educated on hot topics. If one client's, struggling or has questions about a certain area, we found that just coming together and having a quick presentation, being able to ask questions all together is a great way to just educate and figure out what maybe one organization is doing and what they're not doing. And it's just a great learning opportunity. So I appreciate y'all being here. As AI technology continues to advance, employers are increasingly exploring its potential to enhance productivity, efficiency, and decision-making in the workplace. While this technology presents opportunities for employers, it has limitations and exposures that must be considered. And I'm thrilled that we have Mitch. I'm sure many of you have dealt with Mitch through our agreement with Ironwood Business Consulting, and he's going to be presenting on this topic this morning. I welcome y'all to ask lots of questions. We are using the Mentimeter platform that we use in the past, which allows y'all to fully engage throughout the presentation, and I highly encourage you to do that. Feel free to submit any questions that you might have in the chat box, and I'd be happy to relay those on to Mitch throughout the presentation. So without further ado, Mitch, I'm going to hand things over to you, and we can't wait to hear what all you have to share with us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So yeah, like she mentioned, we're going to be using Mentimeter today. So if you feel like chiming in and answering a couple questions, you can scan that QR code, or you can visit menti.com and enter that code. It's 3679-1882. Can give you guys about a minute or so if you want to scan that real quick. But yeah, AI in the workplace is definitely an interesting topic. I mean, it's still relatively in its infancy. I mean, there have been some practical implications. For example, here in the attendees list, I'm already seeing at least one AI in here, so that's kind of cool. But I mean, just from a practical standpoint, there's a lot of ways that it can be streamlined if done correctly, or it can streamline a lot of work if done correctly. Before we get too much further, though, I do just have a quick disclaimer that I want to cover. I'm not an attorney. I can't provide legal advice. This is going to be based on best practices and current regulatory guidance. As I'll cover a little bit later on, there are some proposed regulations out there I'm going to touch on, but regulations can change. So if you are looking at implementing it, I highly recommend just taking a look. You can reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you guide through that. But take a look, make sure that you're operating off the most current regulations before implementing your processes, just to avoid any headaches. So first question for those of you guys that have joined Menti, if you haven't yet, you can visit www.menti.com. Again, that code is 3679 and then 1882. First question though, I just want to get an understanding of kind of how many of you guys are using AI in the workplace, or if it's something you're considering, not using it all. I just want to get kind of a temperature check on that. And I'll give you guys about a minute or so to answer. Looks like we got 3 so far. Looks like all people that have adopted AI. Got somebody that's experimenting with it.
And if you're just joining, just a quick reminder, the code is at the top. So if you go to menti.com, if you haven't used this before, go to menti.com, and then this is your code up at the top right here. And then that'll allow you the opportunity to vote and participate throughout.
Perfect. We got somebody who's considering it. I'll give you guys another we'll say 15 seconds.
Yes, I sent it to him.
Okay.
But it said to click here so you can vote, but I don't see that. code that shows- Maybe it's here.
Okay. Did you tell the property manager you emailed it to?
Looks like
Yeah, I
the
sent it to
majority of respondents are at least dabbling with it a little bit. Which is, I mean, it is a growing technology. So I'm anticipating that more and more companies are going to be implementing AI as it further develops. As far as the agenda today, though, we're going to be covering AI in the workplace and help you get a little bit of a better understanding of how it can be used. The benefits of AI adoption. We're also going to be covering some of the challenges and risks, as well as kind of the future of AI as a whole. So we can go ahead and dive into it. But first off, I want to just cover kind of some basic information as far as AI is involved. So AI is an acronym for artificial intelligence. Essentially, it refers to systems that exhibit intelligent behavior, mimics human cognitive functions like learning, problem solving, and decision making. So essentially, it's technology that's able to think, process, things like that. Machine learning is really how that develops, though. So machine learning, to oversimplify a process, basically you feed it data, it looks at it, runs through algorithms, and then based on that, it can identify patterns and trends and then carry that forward. Deep learning takes that a step further, where they've got multiple artificial neural networks that are all working together for more complex pattern recognition. So things like facial recognition, it'll break down a photograph of a face, and then it'll be able to identify, okay, this is a face. And then using the patterns that it'll identify, it'll be able to say, okay, this is this person, through those algorithms that it'll run. So it's kind of interesting in that aspect that essentially it boils down to patterns that it's identifying. So what is AI? Well, it's a field of computer science that's focused on creating intelligent machines capable of performing tasks that typically would require human intelligence. These tasks can include learning, problem solving, decision making, or even creative endeavors. I don't know if you guys have, those of you that have experimented with AI have tapped into the generative side, but you can use it to create photographs, pictures, things of that nature. I've played around with it writing articles, things like that, just to kind of familiarize myself with it. So there's a lot of potential there to utilize it beyond just data analytics and looking for patterns. But at the end of the day, it does all kind of circle back to using algorithms and patterns and extrapolating data from that. So a little bit of history on AI. I mean, the earliest AI forms were focused on simple tasks, you know, playing games like checkers, solving basic mathematical problems, things of that nature. Back in 1966, AIs have been around for a while, but that was one of the first chatbots that were ever created. If you've ever visited a website where they've got that automated chat where you punch in things and the AI will respond to you, that technology is not something that's new. In its earliest forms, it was actually back in 1966. Obviously, the technology has expanded considerably since then, and the capabilities have grown, but the rudimentary aspects of it have been around for a while. From there, we started seeing the rise of expert systems, which could perform complex tasks within specific domains. So medical diagnosis, financial analysis. So, for example, algorithmic trading started to grow in the 1980s. Back in the 1990s was when we started to see that rise of machine learning, which enabled AI systems to learn from data without specific programming. A big example of that was back in 1997, if you've heard of Deep Blue. So that was an AI that was actually able to beat a chess grandmaster at chess. So it's kind of interesting seeing that development where a computer was actually able to beat somebody who's a world master at something. And then more and more, we're starting to see the growth of deep learning. So that's essentially allowing breakthroughs in image recognition, natural language processing, and autonomous driving, where we're going beyond just AI able to accomplish simple or moderately complex tasks to really being able to expand out into truer thinking in a sense. But how does that impact the workplace? Ultimately, you tend to see that happen in kind of three areas. So there's automation and efficiency. So it's able to automate those repetitive tasks. The first thing I always think of are those images or videos of the welding robots in manufacturing facilities, where it's automating that aspect of production on an assembly line to streamline production. That in turn then frees up human workers. So we're moving away from humans performing those repetitive tasks into more strategic or higher level roles. It also enhances decision making. So things like data analysis, things like that. You can load a lot of information into an AI system and it'll come back with its take on the trends, patterns it's identified, things of that nature. Instead of you sitting there pounding out a spreadsheet, the AI will do that for you, come back with those recommendations so that you can make those informed decisions. And it also allows you to personalize experiences. So, for example, tailoring tasks and tools to specific needs, you can really leverage AI in that aspect to make those tweaks, to personalize it and make it your own so that it's something that you can use more effectively. So I got another question up here. How do you think you could use AI to benefit your company? I'm curious, those of you guys that have already adopted it, what use cases are you seeing for it? And I'll give you guys a minute or two to answer that. I know from my end, I've personally used it a lot on data analysis. So taking a look at data, things like that. I've used it as a reference point when researching things. I don't necessarily rely on it as the end all be all, but it is a resource that's there that I can potentially leverage in those situations. I've also seen individuals use it for copyright. So if they're working on an article, they can use it for cross-referencing things. Job descriptions are a great resource. I've also played around on the image generation side in my personal life. Wasn't fully satisfied with it there, but I'm sure as the AI grows, there's definitely going to be the potential there. Give you guys another minute or so if you want to chime in and throw out some ideas. Draft produces that we can tweak, yeah. Creating summaries, explaining complicated documents. That's definitely a great one. I've used it on that end as well, where throw in a bunch of information, have it kind of summarize it, or something that's written in legalese, have it translated into something that's a little more readable. Presentations, policy development, newsletter articles, handbook revision, yeah. So there's a lot of potential use cases for AI. It just really comes down to how you choose to leverage it. For example, like I touched on earlier, I know we've got a note taker AI in the attending today. So using it for things like that, where instead of having somebody manually writing down all the minutes and stuff from a meeting, you can have AI do that and produce a transcript for it. So over on the automation side, it can increase efficiency. So repetitive tasks, it can free up human workers so that they're not focused on those repetitive areas and allows them to move on to more complex or strategic work. It can also reduce errors if programmed correctly. Provided everything is set up correctly, it'll be able to replicate that task and minimize those issues associated with it because it's going to automatically know where to go, what to grab, things like that. And then it can improve productivity by streamlining workflows and reducing that manual labor. So it can significantly boost overall productivity. One of the big examples of this that I always think of is Amazon. In some of their warehouses, they have robots that it'll receive the order, it'll go track down the item based on the inventory log that's in there, pick up the item, transport it over so that it can be packaged. Yes, a human can accomplish that same thing, but it's streamlined because it knows exactly where to go, the path to take. It'll run an algorithm to find the most efficient route. Again, that depends on the inventory logs being accurate and things like that. So it's not fully autonomous, but it can be used to streamline things in those situations. Along those same lines, you can use it for decision making. It can look at a vast amount of data and identify those patterns and trends that humans might miss. Ultimately, that's what machine learning boils down to, patterns, recognizing those patterns, recognizing those trends and extrapolating outwards. So you can use that to not just analyze that data, but really expand that out into predictive modeling. Over at BMW, they use it for things like inventory management to track, okay, this is what we're moving, this is what we're not selling, therefore we can adjust our inventory accordingly. Over on the Volkswagen side, they actually use it for predictive maintenance. So it'll look at the work that's being done by its equipment, analyze those trends, analyze the information that it has, and go, hey, based on workload, we might need to look at replacing these parts in these machines so that they can continue to operate efficiently. And it can also provide real-time insights. So instead of having to have somebody manually load all the data in there into a spreadsheet or something like that, analyze it, and then turn around that data, you can use AI to streamline that process and get more of a real-time result from it instead of depending on, okay, this person's going to create the data, analyze the data, then generate a report a few days later. So AI, like I've mentioned a couple of times, I mean, it's all about patterns. And that's where you can really leverage it. So the algorithms within can analyze those vast data sets and identify patterns and insights that humans might miss. If you look at things like algorithmic trading in the financial markets, it can respond very quickly and identify, hey, this stock is poised for a jump, so it's going to snatch that up, things like that. Predictive analytics, so you can get a forecast of what's going on. And then you can also use it to visualize data, which is an area that I personally find helpful because I'm not very good at creating graphs and charts. So from my end, I can load data in there and it can spit out a chart so I can have a visualization of something as opposed to just staring at a bunch of numbers. So it can make things more accessible in that regard as well. So as far as customer service, I'm sure somebody else in here's had the experience. I know I have, where you reach out to a website, a little chat box pops up, and you can ask it questions and it might give you an answer on it. So a lot of companies are shifting more towards that AI in the customer service side, where they've got a rudimentary chatbot that you can talk to, and it'll hopefully get you pointed in the right direction. It's not going to fully replace the human element, but one thing that it does offer is that 24/7 availability. I mean, if you're looking at trying to staff a call center, that's going to mean somebody on multiple shifts, probably 3 shifts if you wanted 24/7 coverage. Whereas you can load one chatbot in there, it'll be able to jump on things. And then if it's not able to get the answer, it can then route to an actual human for assistance. So in situations like that, where maybe it's a basic customer service issue, like, hey, what's the status of my order? You could use the AI to streamline that. And then if it's something more substantial, like a missed package, something along those lines, then it can be routed to a human for more efficient problem solving. So like somebody mentioned early on before we started, it's also seeing a rise in healthcare. We've mentioned chatbots for intake, things like that, but it can also be used to recognize trends to diagnose situations. So for example, AIs have been trained to look at x-rays, and they've become better than humans at spotting fractures based on those x-rays. So it's going to aid in the diagnostic side. It can also be used to run simulations to get a better understanding of the potential implications of developing a new prescription, for example. One of the aspects of it that I found particularly interesting is they can actually use it to create a map of a surgical site. So if they're looking at performing surgery, they can use that AI, create a map of it so they won't need as large of an incision, because they've got this AI 3D map that they've created that can go in there. The AI can actually guide the surgeon to make sure that the surgery is being done correctly, while minimizing the need for a gigantic incision. Over on the manufacturing side, assembly lines are kind of the big one that always comes to mind, but it can be used in a lot of different ways, from predictive maintenance, like we've touched on, quality control. So if you load in the information that it needs to understand what that product is supposed to look like in an ideal realm, you can use that AI to do your quality control for you. And it'll look at it and go, okay, this part is out of spec, therefore we need to reject it or send it back. So there's a lot of different ways you can leverage it in manufacturing. And that's really where we've seen a lot of the initial growth of AI start, was on that assembly line side, and then it's expanded out into other areas. On the transportation side, if my slide decides to catch up, we've all heard about the autonomous vehicles, where they're self-driving. You know, the days of people thinking cruise control was self-driving, now it's a reality where you can get into a car and potentially it can operate itself using sensors, cameras, and algorithms to navigate roads and make those decisions in real time. They're looking at possible drone delivery where you can punch in your address, the package will get picked up, dropped off at your house by a drone. It won't necessarily need a human pilot to do that. And then traffic optimization. So looking at those patterns in traffic flow and things like that to help reduce congestion, improve travel. Overall, it's just looking at those patterns and figuring out ways that they can implement improvements based on that information. Over on the finance side, I know I've touched on algorithmic trading, but it can also be used for fraud detection. So again, it's all about those patterns where if a certain trading pattern's happening this way, and then you see a spike in something else, that indicates there could be fraud. Or if you're looking at your transactions within your business and all of your monthly statements are looking one way, and then you have one that's completely out of normal, it'll be able to spot that fairly quickly and then identify it for additional research. And then from the risk management side, I mean, again, it can look at market trends, identify those potential risks, optimize portfolio allocation, and really just be leveraged not only in looking at existing data, but extrapolate that forward into something that could be even more beneficial. Over on the HR side, that's where I found it kind of interesting, is on the talent acquisition side. Things like reviewing resumes. I'm sure we've all had our horror stories where you've had to update your resume so you can get it past that automated ATS system. But it can be leveraged for so much more on the analytics side. Some companies are looking at it from an employee performance standpoint, where it's looking at those metrics, it's looking at those KPIs, doing the analytics, and then it can provide personalized feedback and development plans. So if it's something where you've got an employee that they're a rock star, but they're struggling in one area, it'll identify those trends and then come back with feedback on how that employee can improve and hopefully thrive and turn that weak area into a strength. And then again, from the analytics side, compensation and benefits, doing market analysis. So it can identify those trends that are going on in other companies, provided you can get access to the data and leverage that moving forward to make sure that your business is staying competitive. So I know when we asked the question earlier, a lot of companies were already using AI, but for those of you that aren't, or maybe you're on the fence of it, what are your concerns? And I'll go ahead and throw the code up there if you want to join in and chime in, but I'll give you guys a couple minutes to throw out some of your ideas of what concerns or risks there might be with using AI in the workplace. Privacy concerns, definitely. Putting client data at risk on the internet. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a valid concern. I actually got a letter earlier this week where, as part of another data breach, I think that's about my third one this year. Privacy, definitely. Is that a trust but verify stage? That's excellent feedback. Bias and lack of transparency in algorithms. Definitely a concern. I've got a good example that I'll cover here in a little bit. One that I haven't seen anybody mention, and I'll cover it a little bit more later on, but there's also the ethical side of it, where the information that's being processed by it could inadvertently violate copyright laws, things like that, which ties into that legality that somebody posted. Training employees is definitely a valid point. I mean, a lot of the information that you put into it or get out of it's what you're putting into it, and making sure that you're training your employees appropriately on not only how to use it, but the information that they're putting into it. I'll give you guys another probably 45 seconds or so if you want to chime in and add any last minute thoughts. We can go ahead and move on, but like you guys touched on, I mean, AI does have a lot of benefits, but it also has some risks and challenges that will need to be addressed. First and foremost is the data quality. So whatever you're loading into it's what you're going to be getting out of it. If you've ever heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out, it's a prime example of what you're dealing with on the AI side. Probably one of the most notable ones that came to my mind when I was putting this together was there's a chatbot back in, I think, 2016 that Microsoft prepared. So they decided, hey, we're going to put this thing out. It's going to read tweets and then hopefully communicate like a normal person. Well, it being the internet, some bad actors decided to start feeding it inappropriate content. So within about 16 hours of it going live on Twitter, now X, the data that was being fed into it was corrupted to the point where this chatbot that was supposed to be a normal human was basically saying nothing but racist and offensive material. So they ended up pulling it offline within about 16 hours. So ultimately, the information that you're putting into it, you need to be mindful of controlling that information, making sure that you're putting in the appropriate information, making sure you're putting in complete information, and making sure that information is not biased, because it's going to operate based on the patterns that it can identify in there. And if it doesn't have the information to make good conclusions, it's probably going to be tied back to that data. And I've got another great example of that here in a little bit. Along with that, model complexity. So to build out an AI is not a simple task. It's very time consuming. You need to have an understanding of not only machine learning, data science, and software engineering. There's a mathematical component, there's coding components. There's a lot that goes into developing an AI tool that's actually going to be functional. And then the costs and resources. Yes, there are some free programs out there. ChatGPT is one of them. But in terms of developing those for in-house use, it's going to require some significant investments in not just hardware and software, but you're also going to need skilled personnel that are able to extract the information that you need from it and make sure that you're developing those accordingly. So the costs associated with building and maintaining those platforms can be substantial. Some of the ethical considerations, fairness and bias was thrown out earlier, but it's absolutely a brilliant point. Again, I think it was in the 2010s, Amazon was experimenting with rolling out a resume reviewer. So what they did was they took the data that they had and based on their current workforce, loaded it in there and said, hey, we want to find more candidates like who we have now. Well, the issue with that was they had a predominantly male workforce. So when their AI started reviewing things, it was weighting things that were associated with being a male worker. So if you listed things like president of a women's chess club, it would weight that lower than somebody being a member of a male chess club. So it was automatically biased because of the data set that they loaded in there. So you always want to be mindful of that when dealing with AI, that the information that you're putting in there is what you're going to be getting out of it. So it can perpetuate those existing societal biases. Privacy and data security is another big one. Ultimately, AI relies heavily on data. Everything it does, all the patterns it identifies, things like that, that all comes from the data that you put into it. And making sure that that data is secure is always going to be an ongoing task. I mean, I'm sure gotten the letters where it's, hey, you've been part of another data breach. Your PII's been taken, things like that. So that's always a risk. And then the transparency and accountability side of it, which I'll cover a little bit when we're diving into the regulations later on, but do employees have the right to know, or do individuals have the right to know that they're talking to an AI? Well, some states are saying yes. If it's used for decision making, is there a review process, things like that? So you need to make sure that there's transparency and accountability. There's some debate on whether or not companies should disclose that AI was used in the generation of certain content. For example, using AI generated images. There's a debate on whether or not companies should state that, yes, this image was created by AI versus an actual artist. Similar arguments have taken place with regards to copyright or articles. So it's just something to be mindful that the landscape is constantly developing and could be shifting. So as far as bias, again, they're trained on data. So if the data that you put into it's biased, you're going to be getting biased feedback out of it. The algorithms themselves can also show bias. So for example, you can't have something do everything, and there need to be design considerations made. Well, if you're not careful with how you're crafting those algorithms and how those are developed, you could have something that's only going to look at one or two criteria instead of the full picture. When the designers are creating it, they chose those criteria, but that may not be reflective of what you want to actually look at in your data. So it's going to come out biased based on that. So anytime you're dealing with an AI system, particularly if you're using it for decision making, you want to make sure that you're identifying those potential biases ahead of time and planning to either mitigate or review that or something so that you can ensure those ethical and equitable outcomes. I mean, from Amazon's end, when they had that AI that was reviewing resumes, they recognized that, hey, this is biased, and they ended up shutting down that program at that point because they knew, hey, this isn't going to provide a fair outcome. On the data privacy side, again, you want to make sure that you're protecting sensitive information, particularly if you're using an open source AI like ChatGPT. If you're just using it and loading information into it, take a step back and look at what transparency is being communicated, what their use cases are, and how that's being shared. Typically, if it's being collected by an open source system, it's going to be extrapolated out. So you want to be careful that you're not loading things like PII into an open source AI. And again, you want to be transparent with how people's information is being used and shared. At the end of the day, the protection of information is going to be probably one of the biggest roadblocks that we're going to run into, because it's one of those things that people are always going to be wanting to access that data. You constantly hear about data breaches and hacks. So it's making sure that that information is protected in a situation where, particularly if you're using it in the workplace, you're protecting not only your employers, but your customers as well. And then the big concern that I always hear about, particularly when AI was taken off, was job displacement. You know, on the assembly lines, yes, it might be phasing out lower tier positions, so more menial or more manual tasks where it can automate those things. So there's always going to be the risk of that. So there could be job displacement in specific sectors depending on how integrated AI becomes. But if you are encountering that, that's where reskilling or upskilling comes into play. I mean, we've seen it with countless other technological advances where a particular way of doing things is outdated. And that's where employees need to be on the front cutting edge of taking the time to develop their skill set and make sure, hey, even if this change does happen over here because of AI, I still have this valuable skill set that I can carry forward. And then new roles are always going to be developing, particularly as AI gets implemented. For example, at Ironwood, we've experimented with AI a little bit. And I had members on my team that were far better at navigating through it, generating the correct prompts to get an ideal outcome from it than I was. That was an area that they chose to focus in. That was an area they chose to really dive into. And potentially, if we did look at implementing a whole AI suite, having somebody dedicated to that that really knows the ins and outs, the protection side of it, how to navigate through that, how to get the appropriate information out of it's going to be key. So over on the talent acquisition side, again, you can use it for the initial screening. Something as simple as, hey, let's look for these buzzwords. These are the criteria that we're looking for. It might be able to identify those ideal candidates that you're looking for. I don't foresee this necessarily completely replacing the human element in the recruiting side, because there's still factors like culture fit and things of that nature. But doing that initial screening might be helpful. It can also provide personalized job recommendations. So when I was preparing for this, I was playing around in LinkedIn, and it was able to identify, hey, this is Mitch's skill set. These are jobs that might be a good fit for Mitch. And then it can also use predictive analytics. So again, it's looking at those patterns, looking at the background, looking at the employees that have been successful at the company, and then extrapolating that information out to hopefully identify where candidates can be successful in the workplace based on the information that's fed into it. Again, that's a situation where it's going to depend on the information that's fed, making sure that you've got quality data sets that it can learn from. But the potential is huge there from a predictive side. So as far as upskilling and working with AI, ultimately it's going to boil down into 3 areas. So there's the technical skills, kind of a given if you're dealing with anything tech related, understanding that data science side, the programming side, the machine learning side. The more you understand about that, the better you're going to be able to utilize that system. From there, it's going to be looking at your business skills. So making sure that you have that problem solving, that critical thinking, those communication skills. And then soft skills are also going to be relevant. So the creativity, the adaptability, the collaboration side. All 3 of those areas, not only can AI benefit the company through developing those skill sets, but employees will be better able to use AI if they have those skill sets. I mean, for example, when it comes to feeding it a prompt, understanding what information you need to put into it to try and get the desired outcome is going to take a little bit of creativity and recognizing, hey, there might be some bias in here. Boom, you're going to be leveraging the problem solving in that situation. So as far as the future of AI, and again, things can always shift and change, but there is the potential for it to automate tasks and free up humans for more complex and creative work. Things like note-taking during a meeting. That'll streamline the ability to allow the humans to then focus on what's actually being said instead of writing everything down, so they can be more engaged in that discussion. Potentially, AI will be creating new jobs and industries, fostering growth and economic growth. And then humans and AI ultimately will be working collaboratively, leveraging each other's strengths for optimal outcomes. At this time, and I know there's always going to be the fear of Skynet, but AI shouldn't be treated as a replacement for humans, but more as a tool that can be leveraged. So as far as collaboration, again, AI is a tool, so it should be used to augment human skills, not necessarily replace them entirely. So things like analytics, turning it loose on that so that it can run the initial bare bones checks, look for patterns, trends, things like that. And then that'll free the human up to look at that, use their critical thinking and go, okay, based on this information, these patterns, these use cases, these forecasts, what do we do? Well, now the human can make more informed decisions in those situations. You can also use it for shared decision makings and have that AI provide a recommendation. I wouldn't necessarily, and this is purely personal preference, I wouldn't necessarily depend on the decision it's making, but I could absolutely have it take a look at something I'm not sure of, have it provide a recommendation on why, and then use that to then make my own decisions based on the feedback. And then continuous learning, just leveraging that skill set where I'm reaching out to an AI, for example, getting information from it, carrying that forward, feeding it additional data sets so that that development can happen simultaneously. So as far as employee productivity, I mean, task automation is always going to be the big one that comes to mind because it can free up employees for more strategic work by knocking out those routine tasks. If it's something where you need to send out an email every day, you can automate that. It can provide data-driven insights. Again, feeding information into it, having it run those analytics, having it run those trends and forecast forward. You can use it in that regard, but you can also use it to just optimize those workflows and processes. Have that AI take a look at the process and go, okay, this is a bottleneck. This could be streamlined. This is where your inefficiencies lie. And then you can focus your efforts on that to streamline and improve those workflows accordingly. And then personalized support. AI-powered tools, you can always tweak them to your specific needs and offer that tailored assistance. So if there's a specific bottleneck you're running into on a problem, AI might be able to unjam that roadblock and get things moving forward in an efficient manner. So as far as workplace communication, I mean, we covered the note-taking side, but it can be used for enhanced collaboration. I mean, if you're working across multiple different time zones, things like that, you can load everybody's schedule in there and say, hey, find me a time where everybody can meet to discuss this thing. And boom, you've streamlined your scheduling instead of having somebody manually go through that process. Additionally, if you're dealing with different languages, potentially you could use AI to translate it. I had one as part of an investigation where I was waiting on a response. I was having a document formally translated by somebody from another language, but I was able to throw it into ChatGPT and it was able to give me a working understanding of what that document was about while I was waiting on the formalized translation. In that situation, I didn't depend on the document that was translated by AI, but I used it as a supplement so that when I was reading through that, I had a better understanding of what I was looking at. You could also use it to summarize documents. So if you get something super long written in legalese, you could potentially load it into an AI, have it say, hey, dumb this down for me. And it'll come back with something that's a little more readable and strips out some of that fluff and boilerplate and stuff like that so that you can get a better understanding of what you're actually looking at. Can also be used to improve customer service, like we touched on before, chatbots, things of that nature, where it can provide that immediate information, address kind of minor issues, address frequently asked questions and things like that, routine inquiries, things of that nature, and then turn that over to humans in situations where it's not routine or something more complex and address those situations accordingly. Over on the workplace safety side, I mean, predictive maintenance is the big one. A lot of companies are already doing that where they're looking at the usage trends, things like that, known information to then identify, hey, this system might be trending towards failure. Based on our sensors, we've noticed a rattle in this machine. So therefore, we might need to look at replacing this part to address that issue. So it can detect those issues ahead of time, hopefully reducing the risk of accidents and minimizing downtime of that machine. It's a lot easier to replace a part while something's working than have that piece fail and then 5 other things are damaged as a result of it. You can also use it for risk assessment. So again, it's all about looking for those patterns. So if you're feeding it information, your historical data, it can take a look at that, provide you real-time information based on the trends it's identifying and the potential hazards in the workplace. And then over on the safety training side, and this is the one that I'm kind of excited about, is creating that immersive and interactive safety training. So, I mean, we've all sat through webinars, you're sitting through one now. Think about how much more exciting it would be and engaging if you could actually dive into a simulation in a virtual environment and navigate it through it accordingly in an interactive manner versus sitting here in a webinar. I mean, the potential for that's huge if they can get that implemented correctly. Over on the workplace planning side, I mean, the predictive analytics is a huge one, taking a look at what the market's doing, what the market's anticipated to do, identifying those trends. So then if it's looking at your current workforce, it can identify, hey, we kind of have a skill gap over here. What can we do to address that? Do we need to train this person, transition this person over here to be more efficient? Is this something where we need to bring in additional help so that we can address those situations? Do we have enough labor? Do we need to bring in more headcount? Things like that. Over on the talent acquisition side, like we touched on, you can use those tools to streamline your recruiting process, streamline candidate screening, help match job seekers with suitable jobs, basically making sure that you've got the right person in the right seat at the right time. And then over on the retention side, it can be used to identify factors that contribute to turnover. Can look at those trends of, hey, this is what's going on. This is the feedback we've got from these employee surveys. This is what they're identifying as potential risk factors and why they might want to leave. This is the impact that that's having on turnover rates. And then it can extrapolate that information out to help you plan accordingly to say, hey, if we want to address turnover, maybe we should look at some of these programs. Maybe we should look at doing this a little bit differently and hopefully improve your retention rates accordingly. On the employee engagement side, I mean, you can use it to provide personalized feedback and guidance. So hopefully boosting employee motivation and performance. I mean, again, if you're feeding that information in there, depending on your data set, it could take a look at it and identify that employee's strengths and weaknesses so then you can tailor your feedback accordingly. If you have an employee that's an absolute rock star, but they're struggling in one or two areas, it can identify that and give them potential recommendations on how they can improve in those areas. It can be used to help facilitate collaboration between teams and foster that sense of belonging and teamwork. And you can use it even for your recognition and rewards programs. So if you have emails that get sent out celebrating anniversaries and things like that, you can streamline that. You can use it to drive engagement and things like that in that nature. So there's a lot of potential there just from a pure engagement standpoint as well. That said, there are some key considerations if you are using or considering using AI in the workplace. So far, most of the regulation has really been focused on the state level, not necessarily the federal level as of yet. The big one here in Texas is Triago. So this is currently still in the proposal process. It hasn't been signed into law, but essentially it's focused, or in its initial entity, it's since been revised, but it was really focused on requiring disclosures of the use of AI. It was focused on making sure that it's used ethically. And a key component of that was an actual appeals process if AI is used in decision-making. Since it was proposed, it's been revised so that it's now more focused on government use as opposed to the private sector. But there are still the potential requirements of requiring disclosure of the use of AI. So if somebody's interacting with an AI platform like a chatbot, they could potentially require that. And then the other key component of that that carried over into the private sector was the requirement that employee or individuals could appeal the decision if it's made by an AI. Other states are looking at it. For example, Colorado's Artificial Intelligence Act. Illinois had House Bill 3773. Both of those are taking effect in 2026. California has a couple that are floating around as far as possible regulation. But so far, a lot of the regulations have really been focused on making sure that these systems are used ethically and in a non-discriminatory manner. So as far as if you are looking at implementing an AI program, I highly recommend you take a look, review any federal, state, and local regulations, just to make sure that you're as up to date on as much information as possible. From there, you're going to want to create a clear policy on acceptable use. So that means outlining what programs are allowed to be used, which programs are prohibited. If you're loading information into it, what information can be put in. For example, if you were trying to leverage it from an employee analytics side, maybe prohibiting the use of PII or personal identifiable information so that that's not being shared into an open system. If it's something that's being used more on the company analytical side, making sure that you're not loading proprietary or intellectual protected property. From there, you're going to want to take a look and make sure that your systems and data are secure. So if you're loading information into an open system, be mindful of what information is being put into that so that you can protect it accordingly. If you are looking at implementing an AI system, make sure that you've got those protections in place to try and keep it a closed system so that not everybody can access that data. From there, if you do implement an AI program, you also want to be monitoring and evaluating how it's being used. If you're using it for applicant tracking, taking a look at what's coming out of it to make sure that it's not inadvertently being discriminatory. And then remember that AI is a tool, not necessarily a replacement. In its current form, it's far more beneficial to have it spit something out and then review it on the back end instead of, okay, AI said it, therefore that's what we're running with. There's always going to be that need for that human element to have that final approval, that final check in there, just to make sure that the AI is functioning the way it needs to be. I mean, I've had ones where I've run information through ChatGPT and it doesn't give me accurate information. The data set was outdated in that case. So being mindful of those situations where, yes, it's a great resource and you can leverage it and use it as a great benefit, but it has its limitations, in being mindful of that so that you can ideally use that and carry that information forward and catch those issues without it becoming a problem or before it becomes a problem. So with that, I wanted to leave some time for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, you can throw them in the chat, chime in, whatever's easiest for you. I do want to call out a good point that Alan made in the chat while you guys are thinking of questions you want to ask. It is absolutely at a trust but verify stage. Not all information is going to be accurate, but it can be helpful. One thing I recommend doing if you are using AI for research, you can ask it to provide you with sources. Some platforms will, some won't. But if it provides you with the source of that data, then you can dive into it and do a little more research on your own, as opposed to relying solely on it summarizing the information it's providing to you. So it's a way that you can open that up and really verify that the information is being presented accurately, or that it's even a credible source. I mean, there's a lot of information on the internet that may or may not be accurate. So taking that time to do your due diligence checks is always recommended.
Mitch, are you seeing organizations that use it for something, all the time that they come to you for guidance on, or is it just kind of all over the board, kind of how everyone submitted what they're using it for?
In my cases, I've seen it kind of all across the board. I've seen it everywhere from, and it depends on the company itself. For example, one company will use it to generate copyright or articles and things like that for their marketing team. Another company, I've seen them leverage it a little bit more on the HR side, on the applicant tracking, generating policies, things of that nature, where they may not fully have the technical expertise to develop that policy on their own. They'll use that as a starting point. So it all kind of depends.
You're still recommending that, even though it's a starting point, that then go to an attorney just for review? Yeah,
I highly recommend having it reviewed. The one thing that I've run into a couple times when I've seen policies like that were AI generated is the data set may not always be the most current. So it would be great based on prior DOL guidance, prior EEOC guidance, prior regulations, things like that. But it doesn't always capture, hey, there was this House bill that was just passed recently that completely blows that out of the water. So it's outdated already. Do
you see this?
Do you have any AI programs that you've had success with? Use Otter as a note taker and a game changer. I've seen a lot of medical billing and coding programs switching to AI to meet guidelines, since every insurance company has different requirements for billing. From my end, I'm kind of old school in that regard, where I've been hesitant to adopt AI. I've definitely leveraged it on the note-taking side using Otter, Fireflies, things of that nature. Just because if I'm on a meeting, I find it helpful to have that summary to refer back to. I've used AI-generated transcripts for interviews when doing investigations. I don't depend on that. I always refer back to what the actual interview said in the recording, but it is helpful if I'm looking for where a specific statement was made. So I can look through the transcript and go, okay, this is the remark I'm looking for, pull up the timestamp, and then listen to the actual words. So I use it more as like a recollection side. And I've seen great success there. I've played around with ChatGPT a little bit, not really in the workplace setting, but more on the personal side. If I get curious about something, I'll leverage it for research. I've experimented with messaging, stuff like that. I've found that for less complex situations, it's pretty helpful. I wouldn't necessarily depend on it fully in creating policies and things like that, but I have found it useful at times, like if I don't know what to write on a birthday card or something like that. I've used it in that regard.
Yeah.
So it's ultimately just in how you want to leverage it. I haven't really played around with a whole lot of the paid services that are out there. Mostly it's just been kind of dabbling in the free stuff, just because of cost. But I mean, the potential is absolutely there. It's just kind of doing your research to identify what platforms would be most beneficial for your use case.
Any other questions? And again, if something comes to you after we get off this webinar, you do have complimentary access as a NCW client and a Sanford and Tatum client to Ironwood and their team. So if a question does arise, HR related, Mitch would most likely be the individual that you would correspond with on that. They also have great departments for safety, OSHA, DOT. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't taken the opportunity to get signed up, it is a free service that we offer our clients. Reach out to me after this via email, and I'd be happy to provide you with that agreement to get signed. Oh, and then here, thank you, Mitch. Here is his contact information as well. Just a great resource to have in your back pocket. You know, sometimes we know the answer, but it's always nice to double check things with someone else. So I appreciate everyone's time today. And Mitch, I appreciate you joining us and sharing your wealth of knowledge always. And I wish everyone a great week. Thank you, Alan. So thanks so much. And I will be seeing y'all hopefully for our Q2 seminar here before too long. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. You guys have a wonderful day.
Thanks.